seek another war. We do not seek to escalate. But we will absolutely do what is required to protect ourselves.
That's been the simple request of Americans, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. People just want a secure border where we have legal immigration, but we're not promoting illegal immigration.
But I think at some point he probably will get in that race. I hope he stays in his House seat and continues to build seniority for the great state of Montana.
Hi, I'm Scott McFarland in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. President Biden says the U.S. will respond to the drone attack on a base in Jordan, which killed 3 American service members. The Pentagon has identified the 3 soldiers who died in that strike Sunday. The White House is blaming Iran-backed militant groups for it. Dozens of people were injured in the deadliest attack on U.S. troops since the withdrawal from Afghanistan. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us now from the White House. Before we begin, Nancy, let's take a listen to what Admiral John Kirby had to say during the White House press briefing earlier today.
He's weighing the options before him. As he said yesterday, we will respond. We'll do that on our schedule, in our time, and we'll do it in the manner of the president's choosing as commander-in-chief.
Nancy, you were there in the room. What more did you glean or sense from the White House in its response to this?
Scott, what I sense is that this is a struggle for the White House trying to figure out exactly how to respond to this deadly attack. Yes, U.S. troops have been coming under fire increasingly over the past few months since the Israel-Hamas war started. Troops on small bases in Iraq and Syria, but this is the first time that service members have actually been killed. And now we know 3 of them were killed and 40 were injured. And so the White House is clearly looking for some kind of proportional response, stepping up its retaliatory strikes that it has taken before this that have been aimed really more at weapons depots and not necessarily at individuals. But they're under a lot of pressure on one hand from Republicans who are saying they need to strike Iran directly. And they're trying to balance that with this concern that they don't want to get dragged into some kind of direct conflict with Iran.
Nancy, we heard the series of questions to Admiral Kirby. Is the president planning to be there at Dover? Is there going to be some type of meeting or summit with congressional leaders to talk about responses? What other details is the White House actually willing to give out right now?
What they've told us is that the president is actively meeting with his advisors. There have been a series of meetings over the past 24 hours to try to decide exactly how to respond. They didn't rule out, interestingly, a direct strike on Iran, but it certainly didn't sound like they were leaning in that direction. Very clear statements from Kirby there, for example, in the briefing room saying we don't want to get dragged into a conflict with Iran. If that were to happen, there's really no telling where that would go and how it would escalate. And so that is a big and ongoing concern for this administration.
The administration is already dealing with the complicated response to its support of Israel and its actions in Gaza. How does this complicate that or make this more politically challenging for the administration?
Right. Well, the reason that U.S. troops are coming under attack in the first place is because of U.S. support for Israel in this ongoing war with Hamas. And the U.S. is having to operate on so many fronts at this point, Scott. They are consulting with the Israelis on a regular basis. They're trying to negotiate the release of a handful of Americans who are still being held captive by Hamas. They are dealing with Hezbollah in the north. They are dealing with some of their allies and partners in the region to try to keep this situation, the conflict, from spreading. They're concerned every day about commercial shipping and the attacks that those ships are coming under from the Houthis. The U.S. mounted a major retaliatory strike against the Houthis, and you can see that, if anything, the Houthis were emboldened to continue attacking commercial vessels. And that's why they don't have a ton of great options when it comes to firing back at whoever was responsible, and they haven't said for sure yet who was responsible for this latest attack on U.S. service members. How do you take action and know that it is not just going to prompt another major attack by all of these enemies of the U.S. in the region who are looking to make a statement that'll be heard around the world?
At the White House, Nancy Cordes, thank you very much. Let's bring in CBS News contributor Sam Vinograd. She joins us now, former Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism at the Department of Homeland Security. Sam, thanks for being here on set. What do you make of how the White House has responded to this so far today?
Well, it appears that the White House is moving deliberately, and that's critically important in this moment. Having been in these Situation Room meetings on issues involving Iran, it is critical that the White House do two things right now. In the first instance, the White House has to be thinking about how to mitigate any additional security vulnerabilities that face U.S. interests or assets in the region. We have over 40,000 military personnel in the Middle East. In light of the horrific attack near the Jordanian-Syrian border, the administration has to be thinking about what else might be vulnerable and how to increase force protection and ensure the safety and security of Americans throughout the region. At the same time, the National Security Advisor, the President, the Director of National Intelligence have to be providing intelligence on Iranian intentions here. Does Iran want to de-escalate, or are they looking to up the ante? At the same time as well, the administration is most likely reviewing potential targets to strike in the region and trying to figure out what the Iranian response might be.
Should we assume, just like there are some members of Congress who are assertively saying you got to hit back and hit back hard, there may be people in the administration advising the same way, that, we got to be aggressive and giving a more forceful voice in the president's ear?
This is just not a moment to live in extremes. There is a sliding scale of options between where we are today and a direct strike within Iran. The president has worked on these issues for a long time, as have his closest advisors. And prior to launching some sort of irresponsible strike directly in Iran, which could lead to a series of additional attacks on U.S. forces and individuals in the region, there are a range of other options on the table, Scott. There are IRGC assets and individuals throughout the region. There are other Iranian proxy sites that could be potential targets for the administration. So we should not just assume that where we are today or striking Iran are the only options presenting themselves.
I want to move on to another big topic, but one final question on this. When's the time for the president to speak on this? How's that decision made? This is for President Biden to say versus Admiral Kirby to say.
The president, I think, will likely speak once he has taken decisive action. There are a lot of questions right now about what is a president's strike, what is he thinking. It would be dangerous to preview what the president is potentially authorizing as we speak when it comes to striking Iran. We don't want Iran and its proxies to have the upper hand and to be able to plan ahead, remove critical assets from within our strike zone. So the president will likely speak after he has launched a retaliatory attack against Iran.
Back here at home, the week begins with those Senate border security deal negotiations still underway. They have this appearance from a distance of being pretty fragile. Is it still a possibility, or do you sense the closer we get to the election, this thing risks falling apart?
Well, I hope it's a possibility, because so much depends on the negotiators and political leaders being able to come to an agreement, including getting critical funding to Ukraine. I think the trump card here is, well, President Trump. And so the closer that we get to an election, the closer Republicans fear that their ties with Donald Trump trump the security of the country, as well as our funding for Ukraine. So I think time is not on our side in this regard.
The House Speaker saying this may be dead on arrival. You think that worries the White House the way it may worry some of the negotiators?
I think it certainly worries the White House, and it is worrisome to all when, again, the safety and security of Ukraine is at risk, not to mention what's happening at our border. I worked at DHS for 3 years. I know that the administration critically needs funding to do what's necessary to protect our borders and to do so in a humanitarian way.
Sam Vinograd, former DHS official. We'll see you again soon. Thank you
so much.
Key border policy negotiators do say the White House and Senate are near a deal. Let's go to Capitol Hill and get the latest reporting from there next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. We could soon learn the framework of the bipartisan border negotiations between the Senate and the White House. Senator James Lankford, one of the key negotiators, joined CBS's Face the Nation to discuss where that legislation stands.
We're working on the final aspects of it to try to be able to get it out so everyone can get a chance to read it. Right now, they're all functioning off of internet rumors.
So you don't have a vote count yet?
Do not have a vote count yet on this because everybody's got to be able to read it to be able to go through, but I do feel very positive about it because even the initial feedback has been good.
Joining us now, Nicole Killian and Robert Costa. Nicole's a CBS News congressional correspondent. Bob is CBS News' chief election and campaign correspondent. Nicole, let's begin with you at the U.S. Senate. As the evening begins, what's the latest we're hearing about this?
Well, obviously, the Senate's out today, so we'll kind of read more of the tea leaves when senators get back tomorrow. But based on Senator Lankford and also Senator Chris Murphy, both of whom have been key negotiators in this deal, both of them continue to indicate that they're very close. They're simply a matter of just trying to finalize the text, the legislative language of this potential border deal. Senator Murphy even going so far as to say he believes that language could be brought to the floor as soon as this week. What we do know about the deal that is starting to take shape is that basically this would allow the border to effectively be shut down by the executive branch when these migrant crossings reach a certain level. Right now, that threshold that's being talked about is roughly 5,000 migrant crossings per day, or 8,500 migrant crossings per week. If those crossings reach that kind of level, that in effect, the executive branch could shut the border down and start to pare back on those crossings. It would also potentially shorten the asylum claims process so that some of these cases move forward a little quickly, more quickly, I should say, that they are more streamlined, and also that there could be provisions related to immigration as a whole. So those are some of the components that are starting to take shape. We know one sticking point has continued to be this issue of parole, which some Republicans want to see limited since it's kind of been used to resettle some migrants. But again, both lead negotiators believe that they're getting extremely close and hope to be able to present something to lawmakers in the coming days.
Bob, we're so close to congressional primary season for Republicans, and you got the top negotiator for Senate Republicans, James Lankford, taking heat inside his own party for just being part of these talks now that Donald Trump has started dunking on the plan. How tough an issue is this for Republicans right here, right now?
This is an issue that's not playing out in a traditional dynamic when it comes to immigration politics, because so many lawmakers, both Republicans and Democrats, feel like they are under enormous pressure to get something done to address border security. And because of that impetus, they're still driving toward a deal in many parts of both chambers at this time. Even as they talk about their reservations, they haven't seen the text. They're hearing from their constituents left and right that something needs to be done on immigration and on the border. And with the White House willing to play ball to a point with Senate Republicans and even some House Republicans on some of these issues, that's made it easier to say you're trying to engage in these discussions as a Republican. It's not like you're supporting tax increases by working with President Biden and the Democrats on this. You're working on border security. So, yes, former President Trump doesn't want to see a deal done, and he's leaning into this. But he's a former president. He's not the incumbent. And he's not seen overwhelmingly as the only person with political capital in the party. So I don't believe Trump's influence at this point will kill the deal. It doesn't help the deal. But in a way, it actually helps the Democrats, because to have Trump opposing it, it gives them even more reason to come to the table and say, this is something maybe we want if we can get enough Republicans.
Because there's a number of dissenting voices among Democrats on this, too.
That's right.
Nicole, let's pick it up there. House Speaker Mike Johnson holds an awful lot of really, really big cards in this. He has the ability to take it up to the floor or keep it off the floor. Based on what the Speaker's been saying over the past few days, what's your read on where he is on this?
Well, he indicated in a Dear Colleague letter a couple of days ago that this potentially could be dead on arrival. I think what's interesting to note about Speaker Johnson is really he has not been a key player in these negotiations, and perhaps that could be part of why at times he's kind of poured cold water on them. At the same time, he has suggested that aid to Ukraine is important. Certainly, you remember he was part of that big meeting at the White House a couple of weeks back with congressional leaders, but he knows that he does have to deal with a significant faction of members who do oppose additional aid to Ukraine and who also want nothing less than the border security package that House Republicans passed many months ago, H.R. 2. So he knows he may not get the votes for a potential Senate bipartisan deal. And there's always kind of that tension between both the House and Senate. You know, many House lawmakers, particularly House Republicans, don't necessarily want to swallow a pill that comes over from the Senate. So there's that dynamic as well. So irrespective of what happens in the Senate, it certainly is potentially an uphill climb in the House, in addition to dealing with potentially some progressive lawmakers on the Democratic side who may have some issues with this potential deal and feeling that some of these measures may go too far. So it will be very a delicate balancing act in terms of the math, both in the Senate and the House.
Bob, who knows what's going to be the transcendent issue in October or September? From your reporting, how resilient an issue is the border going to be in this campaign for the White House, whether there's a deal or not?
It's an issue for Democrats, but it's an issue that's tied to the economic argument the administration's making. So much of the reservations working Democrats have when I'm encountering them on the campaign trail has to do with the idea not just that the border isn't secure, but they worry about migrants coming over and competing for their jobs. And you see the president trying to work with groups like the United Auto Workers, the recent endorsement of that group, and Sean Fain, the president there, to shore up his support among working Americans who might be tempted to really start to listen more to Trump on an issue like border security and immigration. While the White House is countering all of that, the Trump message by saying, we're addressing it, we're engaged in discussions with these Republicans. At the same time, we're trying to really help you on economic issues with our investments in A, B, and C programs across the board. So economics and immigration tied together for the Biden reelection campaign.
Well, as this is happening, the House Homeland Security Committee is prepared to move forward, mark up impeachment articles against one of the White House's top negotiators, the Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas. Nicole, in the room tomorrow at the Homeland Security Committee, what do you expect to see?
Well, you can expect the committee to move forward with this process. They did release those two articles over the weekend, citing that they believe that Secretary Mayorkas is guilty, if you will, of willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. That is one article. The other is for breach of trust. And they believe that, in essence, Mayorkas has really committed a dereliction of duty. In their view, this is mostly committee Republicans with respect to how he has handled the border. And so that is why they are moving forward with this markup of these impeachment articles. And now I would note that there have only been 2 impeachment proceedings or hearings thus far by the committee. There had been a lot of back and forth between the panel in terms of trying to get Secretary Mayorkas to testify. That never materialized, nor so far to date has he been able to provide any written testimony. And so the Department of Homeland Security is really knocking this as what they say is a sham process. That was echoed just this afternoon by many House Democrats and Democrats on the committee, who also say that this is nothing more than a political hit job.
On the Hill, Nicole Killian here in studio. Robert Costa, thank you both for your time. A Montana congressional candidate joins to discuss his bid for federal office and why he decided to get into the race. That's next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Montana Republican Congressman Matt Rosendale has said he's considering a run for U.S. Senate. Multiple Republicans have already jumped into the race to win his congressional seat. But National Republican Senatorial Committee Chairman Steve Daines said on America Decides last week he wants Rosendale to stay where he is.
I hope he stays in his House seat and continues to build seniority for the great state of Montana. But, it seems like he may be getting in that race, and we'll see what happens.
Montana Republican State Senator Ken Bogner joins us now. He's running for Congressman Rosendale's seat, along with potentially several, if not many others. Thanks for joining us here. The first question I have is, considering how pivotal Matt Rosendale might be to this Senate race if he gets in, and how pivotal he's been, it's kind of a thorn in the side of House leadership this year. Are you sure he's not coming back to that House seat?
All intentions look that he is going to jump into that race. I signed on to a letter back in the fall encouraging to do so. We're waiting. All eyes are on that U.S. Senate race, so we'll see.
Well, you've seen what the U.S. House has done this year. They ousted a speaker. They spent a few weeks trying to elect a new one. They've had standoffs and near government shutdowns. Why do you want to be in the U.S. House right now?
For national security issues, we've seen failures from this administration, starting back with Afghanistan, that withdrawal. I served in the Marines. My younger brother was a Marine as well. He was wounded in Afghanistan. I had buddies who I served with that didn't come home. And to watch the botched withdrawal was unacceptable to me. And now we're seeing the same thing at the southern border, just open borders. And on top of that, our national debt and deficit spending has become our biggest national security threat. Those are issues that need accountability, and that's why I'm running. It's bigger than just a speaker vote or some contention in the House. These are big issues that need solved today.
Well, give us a sense then of what you would do if the Senate cuts a deal on border security that the Democrats like, the White House likes, and Senate Republican negotiators like. If you were in the House, is that something you'd consider, or would you listen to Donald Trump and say, I don't need to see it, I'm a no?
Biggest priority right now is closing the border and securing the border. Once that's done, then we can start negotiating, in my opinion. Let's negotiate from a point of security and close borders rather than an open border and, allowing thousands of people to enter into the border each day. Let's negotiate from security.
I'm sorry, Senator Bogner, does that mean you would not entertain a Senate deal as things stand now?
I would if it closed the border. That's what I would vote to do, is close the border and negotiate from that point of view, rather than allowing people come in and in. I would have to see that negotiated response, but that's what I want. I want a closed and secure border. That's what I want to vote for. And if it's not that, I'm not going to support that.
When you hear the reports we all heard this weekend of 3 service members killed in Jordan, do you align yourself with what Senator Lindsey Graham says? You hit Iran hard, or would you be open to the White House taking its time before deciding what to do, or being more deliberate and judicious on what to do here?
That's a great question. And as a Marine and who'd served in Iraq, that region, almost 20 years ago, I encourage some restraint. We don't need to get into another forever war. We have to be very careful about our response, and that it doesn't lead to more war, more debt, more on this issue. We need to be responsible here with our response.
Speaking in Montana, via Zoom connection, Montana State Senator Ken Bogner. Thank you very much for joining us. And on the campaign trail, you and the other candidates, best of luck.
Thank you, Scott.
That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.